Hello and welcome back to Psychology 303, the analysis of everyday behavior. I'm Dr. Williams, and this lecture is lecture 20A over chapter 20. It deals with self-management. We're doing these later chapters to prepare you for your self-managed behavior modification projects. So this one is about self-management in particular. So self-management is really a program in which a person engages in specific behaviors in an effort to change a particular aspect of their behavior for the better. So there are certain things that we formally do for a self-behavior modification that allow you to take control over some behaviors in the sense of increasing or decreasing those behaviors. So the behaviors that we control, the controlled behaviors, are the behaviors that we want to increase or decrease. Perhaps we're talking about behaviors that we don't do enough or that we do too much. So, for example, they might be exercise. Maybe you don't exercise enough, or maybe you don't exercise enough every day. So you may want to control how much of the behavior you do every day. You may want to gain control over your diet, or how much water you drink, or studying, or cleaning. These are behaviors that maybe are not occurring the way you would like them to occur. You could also, usually these are increasing behaviors. You can also decrease behaviors, like some behaviors that my students have done are like biting their nails or using the interjection when they speak. So you could either increase or decrease those behaviors. And the techniques that we use are the behavior principles or the methods that we use to help achieve those goals. And they are part of the intervention techniques that we're going to be studying all quarter. And so I'm going to introduce some of these early on so that, briefly, so that you can start to employ them and use them. But we'll go back and study them in more depth as we go through the chapters. So specifically, we're talking about things like punishers and reinforcers, maybe the use of prompts or reminders to engage in certain behaviors. And these are all therapeutic behavioral techniques that we can use to increase or decrease our behaviors. The trick here is that we're going to be conducting a functional behavioral assessment so that we better understand our behavior. And so we're going to be using the ABCs of behaviors. So you kind of have already selected behaviors that you're interested in. So I want to talk specifically about the antecedents and the consequences. So antecedents are those cues in the environment that prompt you to either do the behavior or that prompt you to do behaviors that interfere with your target behavior. And so we're going to manipulate the environment before the behavior occurs. We're going to come up with ways to change the environment enough that when the opportunity to increase or decrease our behavior occurs, we're reminded of what our goals are. We're also going to deal with consequences. So we're going to change the outcome of our behavior, or outcome of which behavior we choose to engage in. So we'll do that by manipulating the consequences of your successful use of those behaviors and instances where you fail to use those behaviors. So we're going to have consequences for both. So let's talk a little bit about antecedents. This is anything that you can set up or do before the behavior occurs. This can include things like changing your motivational state. In behavior analysis, we talk about establishing operations and abolishing operations, EOs and AOs. And an EO is anything that makes a behavior or makes a reinforcer or a punisher more effective. So establishing operations establish the reinforcers as valuable. So that could be one of the most common establishing operations is deprivation. So making it so that you can't have your reinforcers except when you engage in these behaviors. So if you're used to having a latte every morning, now your latte will depend on whether you've done the behavior, your target behavior, correctly the day before. And you don't get to have lattes any other time. So we withhold that reinforcer, and by withholding the reinforcer, we make it more valuable. So things that we do that can make reinforcers more valuable, or abolishing operations are things that can make punishers more effective. So, for example, one of my punishers is to eat a tablespoon of mayonnaise before in front of my class. It's disgusting. Just the thought of it makes me kind of sick. But a way to change my motivational state, to increase my motivation to meet those goals, I might have to, every morning when I get up, I might have to put my finger in the mayonnaise jar and get a little bit on my finger and taste it. And once I've tasted it, it makes the idea of a teaspoon or a tablespoon of it so awful. I don't like it to begin with. That little taste is enough to make me go, ugh, and that increases my motivation to engage in my behavior. So if I pull that outcome, I don't have to actually do that. We also can, in terms of antecedents, we can also create prompts and cues and reminders that make our behavior more likely to occur. So, for example, putting a little reminder, a little sticky label on your bathroom mirror that reminds you of what the goal is today. I had a student who wanted to increase his tendency to put his seatbelt on before he started the car. So he put a sticky note on the steering column that just said seatbelt, and so that provided him with a prompt or a cue for what to do correctly. You can also eliminate prompts or cues for competing behaviors. This is like throwing the box of cookies away, or putting the dessert in the back of the refrigerator rather than the front of the refrigerator. So that when you open the door, you don't see the impulsive alternative first. So you can create new prompts and new cues and new reminders. You can also decrease the prompts and cues for behavior you're trying to eliminate. Both of these have the tendency to make the desired behavior easy to do. It's easier to choose your target behavior rather than to engage in other things. You can also increase the response effort for competing behaviors. So if you're trying to quit smoking, one of the things that some people do is they take their pack of cigarettes and they wrap it up in an 8x10 piece of paper and wrap it with a couple of rubber bands and put a pencil in it and put it outside in the shed. So the cigarettes are still there, but to engage in that behavior, you have to actually put your boots on and walk outside, go to the shed, take it out, and then one of the requirements is that you write down on that piece of paper when you open it with a pencil, you have to write down what time of day it is, what day, what time, what your motivation is, why you came all the way out, what was your mental state, were you sleepy, were you frustrated, were you angry? And by making the behavior harder to do, you can decrease the odds that you'll engage in that behavior. So these are all things we can do ahead of time. Before the behavior occurs, we can set up these kinds of manipulations. Now, of course, the middle are the B's, the target behaviors. So the behavior of interest is the one that we're going to be working with. You're going to define it in terms of your operational definitions. You're going to, oops, there's a typo in there. I'm going to fix it right now. There. Yay, sorry about that. You want to make sure that your operational definitions have inclusions, what behaviors qualify or count as an instance of the behavior, what are exclusions, so which behaviors could be misidentified as being an instance of the target behavior, but which really don't count. And you want to include the different dimensions of the behavior, and each one would be measured independently. So are you going to count the number of times it happens? Are you interested in a rate, like how many times per minute? So you'd need to do frequency counts, where you would, or rate where you would, I'll put another little thing in here, put an equal sign. That's where frequency or rate is where you count and then you divide by the amount of time that you were observing, or duration or latency. And each one of these measures will require a different kind of measurement. And remember, we recommend that you do at least 2 or 3 of them. That can be very helpful. And then finally, consequence manipulation. So employing the use of effective consequences. So I want to go through this list because we're going to be using all 4 of them. We're going to use positive reinforcement for achieving our daily goals. So this is when you get to choose something from your goodie bag. We're going to create a goodie bag, and it'll have little labels inside that will tell you what you get, and we're going to be working on that during week 3 to develop these goodie bags so that you're able to, if you succeed for the day, then you get to choose something from your goodie bag and you get to reinforce your behavior. Negative reinforcement is escaping or avoiding unpleasant consequences. So when you successfully engage in your target behavior for the day, you get a positive reinforcer and you avoid the naughty bag. You don't have to go into your naughty bag and choose something aversive. You get to avoid that. On occasions when you fail to meet your behavioral goals for the day, you'll receive a positive punisher, having to do something unpleasant for failing to meet your daily requirements. You're going to go into your naughty bag and you're going to pull out some horrible thing that you really would prefer not to do that's really unpleasant. And you will also be giving up the opportunity to get something out of your goodie bag. And so you're going to lose or give up something you'd like when you fail to meet your daily goals. And that's called negative punishment. So you have positive and negative punishment when you fail, and positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement when you succeed. So notice that negative reinforcement is actually a good thing. Negative reinforcement means that that bad thing out there that's looming over your head goes away. You don't have to do it. So that's something we'll talk about when we get to the chapter on reinforcement. Okay, so commonly used treatments include goal setting, so deciding what your goal is going to be. It's really important for us to talk about goal setting. Self-monitoring, keeping track of your own behavior. Antecedent manipulations, manipulating things in the environment that come before the behavior happens that increase the odds of you being successful with your intervention. Things like behavioral contracting, writing up a contract and signing it with your partner. We may even do some of that, so that you list it and make a commitment to your partner in terms of what you do. Of course, arranging reinforcers and punishers, and establishing social support and having your friends and people around you support you and provide naturalistic reinforcers. And then finally, giving yourself self-instructions and self-praise. So these are all things that are commonly used to help modify behavior. So let's talk about a few of these. First one, I want to talk about our goals. When it comes to goal setting, they need to be achievable. I often have students who, for example, want to study more. They set their goal as they're going to study for 4 hours a night. And right now, they only study maybe an hour 3 times a week. That leap is so huge that you're probably not going to succeed. You're just not going to be successful when you try to go 4 hours at a stretch. So you want to start at a level that you can achieve with 90 to 100% accuracy 90% of the time. So you want to make sure that it's very, very likely that you can do it. So if you've been studying for an hour 3 days a week, then we might even set our goal for a half hour a day, or 45 minutes a day, but you have to do it 7 days a week. That's actually an increase over your baseline. So we start at a level that you'll achieve, and then in a changing criterion design, we would gradually increase it from 45 minutes to an hour a day, to maybe an hour and 15 minutes a day. And as you do that, you make it so that the next increase is, again, 90 to 100% achievable. You need to make contact with your success, and you need to make contact with your reinforcers early on. Goal achievement can be a reinforcer too. You're going to be recording these on a graph, but maybe you want to maintain a star chart too that you maybe put on your bedroom door so that your roommates can see it and they can see how well you're doing. Remember that as we do each, when you make a change in your behavior that increases your behavior and increases the odds of success, you can always choose to raise that goal later. So I want you to be conservative in the amount of behavior change that you think you're going to make. And that's huge. You should write down a specific criterion for what you would like to achieve for this desired goal. How much of the behavior do you want to achieve per day or by the end of the week? When are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? How long will you be doing it? If it's study behavior, maybe laying in bed or having the TV on is an exclusion. So you want to make sure that your inclusions and exclusions clarify how the behavior actually is deemed as as having occurred and being successful rather than a failure. So for example, exercise, your inclusions might be 20 minutes of walking, running, biking, whatever it is, but you may also have a requirement that says that you have to get your heart rate up to 120 or 140 beats per minute. Exclusions might include walking around the office or around the building, shopping, non-continuous walking. So you might walk from class to class, but it might not be 20 minutes at that rate, and so it wouldn't count. So you want to make sure in your goal setting that this is that operational definition. You want to be really clear about what that goal is. Another one that I want to talk about is self-monitoring, because this is going to be an important piece of what we do. You need to decide to measure how you're going to go about measuring your behavior, and then you need to record every instance of the behavior. So you need to get some graph paper, and you need to begin a star chart so that you record everything. You can use a star chart. You could write it down on a piece of paper in your notebook that you did the behavior, but you should have the date and the time and the location and all the details of when the behavior occurred. And then you want to take that data and graph it onto your graph paper. And ideally, you should make your graph public. It should be someplace where people can see your progress. Self-monitoring, the act of self-monitoring, can actually be a successful treatment by itself. So people who self-monitor, keep track of their behavior, and post it publicly actually show improvements in behavior without any other interventions. So self-monitoring alone can be a successful intervention. Okay, I'm going to go back here to commonly used treatments. We've talked a little bit about antecedent manipulations and manipulating prompts and cues. I may have us doing behavioral contracting in class. We've talked about reinforcers and punishers and self-support. And giving yourself self-instructions and self-praise means that every day you get up and you look at, maybe you read a little quote to yourself that says what your goal is and a positive statement about your ability to achieve it. Okay, so conducting your self-management program. So these are the steps and choosing your designs and the steps that are involved. So the first thing we need to do is to do your functional behavioral assessment. You're going to conduct an FBA on your target behavior. You're going to take the first 2 or 3 days. So we're going to develop your FBA materials. Then you're going to do an FBA on your own behavior. And you're going to record on your ABC sheet to determine what the antecedents and consequences of your behavior are at the level that they're at right now. So you have a target behavior that's causing some problems, and we want to know what those levels are and what comes before and what comes after, including things so when you have behavioral excesses, behaviors that happen too often, what happens before and what happens after every time the behavior occurs. Behavioral deficits, behaviors that occur but they don't occur often enough. And then absent behaviors, which are behaviors that should be happening but aren't. So behavioral excesses and deficits, you're going to create that ABC sheet, you're going to conduct that FBA, you're going to record every instance of the behavior, and you're going to determine what the antecedents and consequences are for those behaviors. Very, very straightforward. For excesses, you may want to record what's happening before every single time, the setting, the location, all of that information. For deficits, you probably should identify the location, times that the behavior should be happening, and then what's interfering. In some ways, if it's not happening enough, what distracts you? What are the cues or the environmental stimuli that distract you? So, for example, studying on your computer. You're studying, and then you want to record, went to Facebook, and that distracted you. Or had to go to the bathroom, came back, and went to Facebook and started perusing. Or answered the door and then came back and started gaming instead of studying. So you want to put all those interruptions in your FBA as well. For absent behaviors, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to create that ABC sheet. You're going to conduct it over the first two to 3 days. You're going to record antecedents and consequences of the behavior. But these are behaviors that are not occurring very often. What you really need to do is record the antecedents and consequences of the behaviors that are interfering. So for example, if the doorbell rings and I think, oh, I should be studying, and the doorbell rings and it's your friend, and they come in and you hang out playing games on your computer or on your television. The antecedent is the arrival of a friend. The behavior is doing something different rather than studying, and the consequences are having fun with your friend, which is positively reinforcing, and avoiding your homework. So identifying what things are preventing you. Oops, there's an S missing here. I'm going to edit my programs here. What things, here we go. What things prevent you from engaging in your target behavior? So what are the things and the antecedents and consequences of those behaviors that are interfering with your ability to engage in your target behavior? Now, there are 3 designs to choose from. You can choose an ABAB reversal, a changing criterion design, or a multiple baseline. I want to just summarize very quickly. ABAB reversal, you're really dealing with only one behavior, but it's a behavior that can change in just one step. So if it is, you're going to study, currently you study for an hour 3 days a week, and your goal is to study 45 minutes a day, 7 days a week, you can do that in one step. And so you're going to start out with baseline, you're going to go to treatment and institute your treatment so that you start achieving that behavior, and then you're going to return to baseline to check and see whether or not it was the treatment that caused the change in your behavior, and then you're going to return to your treatment condition. So, and we'll talk about the length of each of these, how long they should be, in a few minutes. Changing criterion design, one behavior only, but it has to be a behavior that needs to be changed in steps. So if you're really looking to study 2 hours a night, 7 days a week, that's probably too much to change in one step. So we might shift to 45 minutes a day, and then an hour a day, and then an hour and 15 a day, and an hour 30, and gradually build it up. So you'll go from baseline to treatment step 1, treatment step 2, treatment step 3, etc., etc. The multiple baseline design requires a large behavioral category. You need 3 behaviors or 3 settings minimum. And for each behavior, you will have a baseline and a treatment condition, but you're going to stagger the onset of treatment across the 3 behaviors. So you'll start with drinking more water, and you'll gather baseline on everything, but for water, you'll introduce the treatment, and your water consumption should go up. Then you might have taking vitamins, and you wait a few days after the water has increased, then you start taking vitamins too. Now you're doing water and vitamins. And then finally, you might increase exercise, and that wouldn't happen until the other 2 behaviors have already started, and then you would add your 3rd behavior, walking for 20 minutes a day. So you only introduce the treatments in a staggered sense. You never institute the treatment for all the behaviors at once. You do one behavior first, another behavior, and then a 3rd behavior, each one staggered, but you continue gathering data on all of them until the end of your intervention. We'll talk more about this later. So, getting a baseline. It's important to get an idea of how frequently or infrequently your behavior is actually occurring. So once you've identified the behavior, you've done your functional behavioral assessment, you've defined your behavior, you need about 7 to 10 days of baseline is usually enough to have a good idea of what's happening in terms of the baseline and how much you're doing it. You want to make sure that you're recording your data and plotting it on a graph. And if you're gathering data on more than one dimension, like if you're counting it, but you're also timing it, you're going to need one graph for each dimension. So you're going to have 2 separate graphs running. You're not going to make any changes to your behavior during baseline. You're not going to start your treatment. You're not going to do anything. We're just going to observe the behavior as it currently exists. Those first 2 to 3 days can be when you conduct your functional behavioral assessment. So you're going to start observing the behavior. You're going to record the antecedents and consequences and the motivational states that surround the behavior. And you'll use that information to develop your operational definitions. And then you probably need between 4 and 7 days to serve additional data where you actually are gathering the data and plotting it on the graph will serve as your baseline condition. And remember, this baseline is going to serve as your control data. We're going to use it to compare what happens during treatment back to this baseline. In terms of implementing your treatment, when you shift to treatment, you'll continue to gather data the same way you did during baseline. You'll start your treatment. You're going to put in those antecedents in place, those prompts and reminders. You're going to start using your reinforcer and punishment bags. You're going to graph your data every day the same way you did during baseline. And you're going to follow the guidelines for your treatment design that you chose. So you're going to start now using your ABA reversal design or your changing criterion or your multiple baseline design. For those of you who plan to use a reversal design, you want to be in treatment for about, so you're going to do about 7 to 10 days of functional assessment and baseline. Then you're going to go into treatment, and you probably should spend anywhere from 7 to 10 days in the treatment condition. At that point, you're going to go back to baseline. You're going to suspend your treatments, no more reinforcers, no more punishers, no prompts, no cues, no reminders. You're just going to go back the way it was when we first started. And you're going to continue to gather data. Most of the time, you'll be there for 3 or 4 days. Hopefully, your behavior will go back or show signs of going back to the levels that it was at. After 3 or 4 days under treatment in your baseline conditions, you're then going to put your treatments back in. So you begin your treatments, you'll continue graphing for another 4 or 5 days in your return to treatment. And for the paper that we're going to be writing, for the final project, you really only need 4 or 5 days in that return to treatment condition. However, we're going to use those first 4 or 5 days as the data. But if you decide you want to continue using your bags, if you want to continue using your prompts and reminders permanently or indefinitely, you can do that. Just because you get to the end of the project doesn't mean you have to let your behavior go back the way it was before. So if you, for example, if you improve your study behavior, you can keep these treatment variables in place after our project is done so that you continue using your new study habits. And then later in the quarter, we'll talk a little bit about fading and how we can slowly fade out some of those consequences and prompts so that we can reduce the amount of management that it takes and try to get you into a permanent behavior without having to keep the treatment in place. For some people, the treatment needs to stay in place forever. For people with disabilities, sometimes we just have to set up the environment so that it facilitates appropriate behavior, and it can take some effort, but we create a new environment. For typically developing people, that may be true, but it may also be true that we can finally, once the behavior is really going, we can start to fade out the treatment variables and then just let the behavior continue. All right, so that's the end of Lecture 20A, and I'll be back for Lecture 20B. There are only 2 lectures for this particular chapter. All right, have a good day.